There are various behind-the-scenes functions in Adobe Director that are important to the appearance and performance of a movie. These include color settings, tempo settings, and transition settings. All these features involve using the channels at the top of the score up here in the so-called effects channels area. Each of these, color, tempo, and transitions, will be the topic of this section of the tutorial. Now, to control the way the director manages colors, it's important to understand the difference between RGB and index color and how director assigns colors to various elements in your movie. To control the speed at which your movie plays, you'll use settings in the tempo channel. And to make scenes in your movie flow together without creating the animations yourself, you'll use predefined transitions. I'll get to the latter two topics in a bit, but let me start in this movie with a description of the way the director handles color. To make sure that the colors you select appear correctly on as many systems as possible, it helps to understand how director controls color. Director can use either palette index values or RGB values to specify colors. RGB values are much more reliable and accurate for specifying colors than palette index values, and most web pages use RGB values. Director identifies a palette index color by the number of its position in a set of colors called a color palette. You can see these color palettes everywhere in Director. In fact, if you open up a color chip here, there's an index palette right there with all the different positions. There's position 104, position 1, position 2, and so on. There's also a color palette channel up here. If you double click on a cell or a frame in that, anywhere in that channel, you'll get the frame properties palette dialog that will show you additional palettes. There's the Windows System palette, the Vivid palette, Web 216, Metallic. Notice that at any given spot, except for spot number 1 is always white, but all the other spots contain different colors. For example, right here, position number 2 is a light yellow color in the pastel palette, but in the Windows palette it's a light blue color. In the Metallic palette it's a brown metallic color, and so on. So each of these color palettes has different combinations of up to 256 colors. Director identifies an RGB color as a set of hexadecimal numbers that specify the amounts of red, green, and blue required to create that particular color. When a computer is set to display thousands or millions of colors, Director always displays RGB colors accurately. However, when a computer is set to 256 colors, which is not that common, but it does occur, Director finds the closest color in the current color palette to approximate this RGB color. To choose the color mode for the current movie, you'll want to use the color mode settings on the Movie tab of the Property Inspector. Another reason why I always keep my Property Inspector handy. But if you click on the Movie tab, you'll see that there is a palette setting here, as well as an RGB and an index radio button. So if you choose RGB, again, Director will use the hexadecimal values or numbers to specify the amounts of red, green, and blue required to create that particular color. Notice you've also got a palette drop-down menu here with the various palettes. Same colors that I had available here in the Frame Properties Palette dialog drop-down right here in the palette drop-down. Now when you select Index Color here, for example, here in the Tool panel, or if you open up the Paint window, for example, there's, again, color chips here. Notice that all the palettes will match, depending, again, what you've specified in the control panel. So you'll find those color chips similar throughout the application. You'll use the Transform Bitmap to remap bitmap images to new palettes and change their color depth. Now you'll do this if you have very large images, and I always do this from the Cast window. If you have a project involving a lot of large bitmap images, it's always a good idea to select the image in the Cast window, and then from the main menu choose Modify, Transform Bitmap. And what I usually do is I either reduce the size using the scale or the width and the height, or I change the color depth. I definitely move it down from 32 to 16 bits. 32 is if you want to do alpha channels and other things that are really not well supported in Director anyway. So I always move my images down to 16-bit. That's reducing the size by 50% right then and there. This will still be in RGB. You can also move it down to 8 bits. Certain kinds of images will look okay at 8 bits, others will not, depending on the image. When you do move to 8 bits, notice you need to choose a palette, again from the standard drop-down menu there. I usually go ahead and make a copy of my cast member first and then transform them to 8 or 16 bits, because you'll get a warning here that you cannot undo this operation. So if I click OK and things don't look okay, then I can always delete that image and use the copy. But some of the images will transform better than others. So this is kind of a trial and error. As you get more experience with Director, you'll learn the kinds of images that you can successfully move down to 8 bits. But I always move down to 16 bits because I'm moving from millions of colors to thousands of colors, and almost all images will look acceptable at 16 bits. But again, if not, then keep it at 32.